বাংলা ওয়ার্ল্ডওয়াইড আয়োজিত চতুর্থ আন্তর্জাতিক বাঙালি সম্মেলনের দ্বিতীয় দিনে ভারতের পররাষ্ট্র নীতি ও প্রতিবেশী দেশসমূহ নিয়ে আলোচনা সভার আয়োজন করা হয়। আলোচনা সভায় ভারতের প্রাক্তন পররাষ্ট্র সচিব শ্রদ্ধেয় হর্ষবর্ধন শ্রিংলা বক্তব্য রাখেন। অনুষ্ঠানের শুরুতে হর্ষবর্ধন শ্রিংলা মহাশয়কে পুষ্পস্তবক দিয়ে সম্মাননা জ্ঞাপন করা হয়। হর্ষবর্ধন শ্রিংলা বলেন, ভারতের সম্পর্ক সব দেশের সাথে ভালো, আমরা শান্তিতে বিশ্বাস করি। আমেরিকার প্রেসিডেন্ট ট্রাম্প থাকায় বর্তমান সময়ে অনেক নীতি পাল্টেছে। আমরা রাশিয়ার উপর ডিপেন্ড করি তাদের 70% বিনিয়োগের জন্য। ভারতের সাথে অন্যান্য দেশের বাণিজ্যিক সম্পর্ক ভালো। করোনা মহামারীর সময় বহু দেশকে ভ্যাকসিন দিয়ে সাহায্য করেছে। 2020-তে চায়না থেকে আসা মারণ রোগের জন্য তাদের সাথে সম্পর্কে চির ধরেছে। সর্বোপরি আমাদের পৃথিবী আমাদের সবার। তার মুখে শোনা যায় ইউক্রেন রাশিয়ার কথাও। বাংলাদেশ প্রসঙ্গে তিনি বলেন, কলকাতা থেকে একটু দূরে বর্ডার। বাংলাদেশের বর্তমান পরিস্থিতি স্থিতিশীল নয়। শুধু কলকাতা নয়, নর্থ ইস্টের সাথে বাংলাদেশ সংযুক্ত। জনসাধারণ সরকারের মধ্যে শান্তি খুঁজে পাচ্ছে না। শেখ হাসিনা বলেছেন, ধর্ম যার যার, উৎসব সবার। বাংলাদেশে বহু পূজা পালন করা হয়। ইসলামিক দেশ হওয়ায় সুফি গান সেইখানে বেশি প্রাধান্য পায়। সন্ত্রাসী শুধু শেখ হাসিনার সময়ই না, বিএনপির সময় থেকেও প্রবেশ করত। বাংলাদেশের উন্নতির জন্য বিগত 15 বছরে রাস্তা, ব্রিজ এবং আরও অন্যান্য জিনিস নির্মাণের জন্য ভারত $10 বিলিয়ন বাংলাদেশের জন্য বিনিয়োগ করেছে।
বন্ধুগণ নমস্কার, শুভ অপরাহ্ন। আমি খুশি যে আমি ভারতের বৈদেশিক নীতি নিয়ে আপনাদের মতো গুরুত্বপূর্ণ অডিয়েন্স সাথে কথা বলতে পারবো। আমরা কাছের প্রতিবেশী দেশ নিয়ে কিছু কথা বলবো, very happy to be here and to see so many of our good friends in the audience. The subject, as has been explained, is the roadmap of India's foreign policy with special emphasis on our neighbors. And I'll try and outline how I see the issue. And we will also try and make it interactive so that you can ask questions and we can keep some time for that part of our session. So let us look at things first of all from a very global point of view. I think we can all agree that we are living in very uncertain times. There are today more military conflicts taking place in the world than there has ever been since the end of the Cold War. We also have two major conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. I think if you look back a few years ago, it would be difficult to imagine conflict in Europe. You would find that hard to envisage a situation where you have a conflict within the heart of Europe. And yet, you have two major conflicts that are raging. Although there is some possible sign of some solution in sight, we have to yet watch and see how these regional conflicts work their way and what implication they have on the world at large. And when you talk of implications, then I think it's very important to keep in mind that a conflict can take place thousands of kilometers away, but can have an impact on people who have nothing to do with this. Take the case of the conflict in Ukraine. You had the COVID-19 pandemic, and then soon after that, this conflict in Ukraine broke out. As a result of that, you had a sudden spiraling of energy prices. You had inflation. You had the cost of essential imports that many developing countries make shoot up. And the result of that was that a lot of countries which were from the global south faced indebtedness. And today, if you look at the overall situation, there are about 60% of developing countries who are either indebted or on the danger of indebtedness. So this is something that I think establishes that in an interlinked and interdependent world, there are consequences all around. For a country like India, how did we manage this turbulent time 2022, 2023, 2024 and even today? And I think that is the essential thing that we have to look at. I think India's policy of strategic autonomy, in other words, that having good relations with all, but at the same time not having inimical relations to the extent that you can secure that, has been, I think, very, very important in the way that we have handled the turbulent global situation. If you saw that when the Ukraine war broke out, there was an expectation that we would support the Western point of view and take a position that was based on a certain thinking. Instead, I think our policy was that we emphasized that this was not an era of war. I think Prime Minister Modi said that very clearly. And also that this is, that we are in favor of peace through dialogue and diplomacy. And to back that up, I think India did provide humanitarian assistance to the Ukraine, but also Prime Minister Modi made separate trips both to Russia and the Ukraine in an endeavor to bring peace to these areas. At that time, there was some criticism on our policy, especially from the West. But I think our major partners, especially the United States under President Biden, understood where we were coming from and did not allow this to impact adversely on our relationship. So it is important to manage both your position and to maintain your partnership with important our important interlocutors. And that is not an easy balancing act. We walk the very thin line, and I think that is very, very critical. But if you look at it today, US policy has also changed. After all, with the advent of President Trump, his vision is that he will put an end to conflicts, that there should be global stability when it comes to energy prices. Now, both of these things we have been saying for a long time. And to that extent, our interests converge and coincide. If you look at the fact that I think President Trump has been working towards both a ceasefire in the Middle East as well as a possible ceasefire in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, it is something that dovetails into our own policy and our own efforts in that direction. I will come more on that because the advent of Trump is a factor that we need to also take into account when we talk about our foreign policy. But just in general, I think the fact that during the Ukraine conflict, we were able to maintain a very, very principled position, which is also based on pragmatism, because after all, we had a close relation with Russia. We depend on Russia for about 70% of our defense platforms. And of course, I think there has been a long-standing relationship also with that country that cannot be overlooked immediately. I think our decision from that point of view was consistent. But at the same time, how did we manage to keep our economy at a stable point when economies all around us were facing enormous difficulties? And of course, if you look at our own neighborhood, you saw Sri Lanka's example. Nepal, Pakistan, even I think Bangladesh also had faced severe impact of the, let's say, Ukraine conflict and the cost of energy and the inflation that I think had very, very adversely impacted on these economies. One of the things I think we managed to do was to import discounted Russian oil, and not only did we import the crude and process it, but we were also able to sell that processed crude outside, in many senses even to the Western world. And throughout this process, we did not break any of the unilateral sanctions that were imposed by the West on Russian oil. In other words, we were within the sanctions, but we still managed to import the oil. we kept our energy prices stable, and as a result our inflation remained stable in a very difficult period. 2023, 24 I think was a difficult period, but the fact that we maintained that balance I think is very, very important. And the impact of these conflicts cannot be underestimated, because if you see the Middle East conflict, the Middle East conflict started off as a conflict between Hamas and Israel, but expanded to include Hezbollah, the Houthis, and ultimately Iran. So Israel came into direct conflict for the first time with Iran. And there was a real threat that that conflict would spread into the larger Middle East region, and as a result would impact directly on our interests, because we have 9 million people who work in the Gulf region. We also depend on the Gulf for a major part of our energy supplies. And of course, I think the fact that this conflict would have implications on us could not be overlooked. Let me take a small example of the Suez Canal. A good volume of our trade goes to the Suez Canal, and that is because everything that you want to send west of India, that is beyond the Gulf, has to go through the Suez Canal. So all your exports to Europe and the US and all the imports that you make from these countries have to come through the Suez Canal. Now, because of the conflict in the Middle East and the Houthis directly attacking shipping that comes from the Suez Canal, shipping volumes through the Suez Canal have dropped by 70% in the last year or so. And the impact on us has been that our exports to these countries have increased by 20%. So although it doesn't seem evident to us in our day-to-day life, but the fact is that you are losing businesses because of your add-on in terms of the shipping costs. Because your shipping has to take the long route over the Gulf, the Cape of Africa, and that costs you 15 to 20% more in terms of your normal exports to the United States and to Europe. And I think there is where I think we are getting affected. So what I'm trying to say is that a conflict very far away can affect us in ways that we may not even know or even notice. Now, of course, if you look at the fact that in terms of our own policy, we have made it a point to also work with our partners in the global south. So when we were president of the G20, we made it a point to have an engagement with the global south at the highest levels, at the level of the head of state and government. We consulted the developing world on their priorities, and based on that, we were able to factor in our, how our presidency should be run and what are the priorities for our presidency. And you could see that our presidency came at a very, very turbulent time in the world. We worked with all concerned. And of course, I think that is what enabled us to bring out an outcome. First of all, people were doubtful there would ever be an outcome because of the polarization that cut across the G20's membership, with the West on one side, Russia, China on the other side. I think there was a divide that was very, very significant. But despite that, we worked with all partners to ensure that there was an outcome that not only reflected a certain convergence in the international community, but also had many of our own values and principles ingrained in that outcome document, which is starting from Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Our concept of the world is one family. Two, our ideas of that this is not an era of war. And I think also outlining how countries could work together to bring about not only peace and amity, but also deal with issues that are very, very important, like meeting the sustainable development goals, like dealing with climate change, like dealing with indebtedness that nations face. These are issues that are very important. So whether it is mobilizing the IMF and the World Bank to deal with the issues of developing countries, there was an emphasis that we placed on this, and that was reflected in the outcome. Of course, I think one advantage we've had is that we straddle that ideological space between North and South and East and West. We are members of the Quad, we are regular invitees to the G7, yet we are also members of BRICS and the ACO. So we work with all concerned. And I think from that point of view, our policy has been to assist and help the developing world. So when you talk about our foreign policy, I think it's important to note that it is based on what is called human-centric globalization. That means we use our resources to help others when there is need. So one prime example of that is during the COVID crisis. India was one of the few countries that produced its own vaccines. See, otherwise countries are dependent on vaccines produced elsewhere. But we produced our vaccines indigenously, and we were able to share our vaccines despite the requirement in our own country with a number of countries across the world, mainly developing countries. We also, in many senses, are first responders to crisis that many of our neighbors face, whether it's from natural disasters, whether it is from other areas of requirement. Our assistance is very, very quick to reach these countries. So we are first responders, net security providers, and in the Indo-Pacific region, I think we are a major factor in providing for peace and stability, and not allowing conflicts to take place that would otherwise make it more difficult, and especially I would say more in the Western Indian Ocean than anywhere else. Having said that, I think the world continues to be in a situation where there is great amount of uncertainty. So let me come down to the United States and the change that you see in terms of policies of that country since the electoral victory of President Trump. Now, I had the opportunity to be in the United States under Trump 1.0. That means when Trump was president in his first term, I was there, and to some extent I had a fairly vantage point in observing and dealing with his administration at that time. But this time, he has come in with a much stronger mandate. As you know, he has not only won the electoral college, but he won the popular vote. He has a majority in Congress, which is both the Senate and the House. And at the same time, he has also a majority in the Supreme Court with the Conservatives at a majority. So it is a very, very unique conjuncture in which after some 40 years, the Republicans have a situation where they have as powerful a presidency as one that Donald Trump is presiding over. Now, his policies, of course, are very different from what the Democrats professed. But the one thing that is there in our favor is that there is a consistency in US foreign policy when it comes to India. Because we enjoy bipartisan support, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, we have strong support on either side. And as far as we are concerned, we would like to have good relations across the board in the United States, as the US enjoys support across the board generally, even in our own country. And so when you look at Trump's presidency, then 2-3 things come out. One is, as I said, that his professed intention to bring an end to conflicts. So even before he took over as president, you saw that there was a ceasefire in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel. And I think he has gone one step further in outlining a plan that seems very ambitious. And the Middle East is a very volatile place. It is a place where whatever exists is based on very tenuous sort of agreements, understandings, and the outcome of several conflicts. Whether you can change that status quo very easily is a question mark, but he's come out, as I said, with a very bold plan, which involves getting the residents of Gaza to leave the Gaza Strip, settle down in Egypt and Jordan. United States takes over the Gaza Strip and develops it as a, let's say, as a Mediterranean resort area, which, as I said, I mean, this is something that has to be seen in reality. The fact of the matter is that you have to have a ceasefire that holds. That is very important. And that then you take that process forward and seeing what else can come into place that would hold that peace in a manner that is more sustainable. As far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, I think it is more complicated and clearly is taking more time than the Middle East conflict. There has been talk of, I think President Trump has expressed some impatience from time to time with Putin. At the same time, there's been talk that there might be a meeting in a third country. So we don't know, but the fact of the matter is that the US does hold several cards, and one of which is that it supplies Ukraine with much of its financial support and military support, and also has disproportionate influence in the way NATO functions in Europe. So I would imagine that with the right conditions in place, you can bring about a ceasefire. And then you can sit down and do the more difficult part, which is negotiating what would be the basis for a sustained peace in the Ukraine-Russia environment. I think what complicates matters is the fact that you have not only Russia occupying about 25% of Ukrainian territory, but you also have Ukraine occupying a certain part of Russian territory in the Kursk region. And I think that does complicate things, because both protagonists today are trying to create as many facts on the ground as possible. So Ukraine is trying to expand its hold in the Kursk region and maybe open up new fronts. And Russia is trying to consolidate its own, I would say, control over the Donbass region and beyond. So that is a factor that it's a race for time to see what you can have before you come down to the negotiating table. But what does Trump's advent mean for us? I think it's a mixed bag. If you look at Trump's first term, there were a number of very, very useful steps that he took. First and foremost, he revived the Quad, which I think from our perspective was a positive development. He got, the Quad was a moribund sort of group, but he brought it up to meeting regularly, and then Biden took it forward by having a summit level engagement, and which Trump has agreed to take forward in his presidency. Second, of course, is that we started what is called a 2+2 dialogue, the foreign and defense ministers getting together. He also changed the nomenclature of the Pacific Command to make it the Indo-Pacific Command, and thereby giving salience to the Indo part, which in other words, the Pacific Command then encompasses the Indo-Pacific area, which then became throughout, in many countries, the Indo-Pacific became the lexicon. So if you notice, after that, the UK brought out an Indo-Pacific policy. European countries brought that out, Japan, Australia, etc. So Indo-Pacific became the norm. And there are many other examples. I don't want to distinguish. All I want to say is that during Trump's first presidency, there was a strong emphasis on a strategic partnership, and one that I think was taken substantially forward by him and then by President Biden. So I think it would be safe to assume that our strategic partnership with Trump will find momentum and that we will be able to move forward in that direction. There are some challenges, of course. You've seen the immigration issue. Our position has been that illegal immigration is something that we don't support, and therefore deportations of illegal immigrants that have been happening even under Trump's first presidency will continue. At the same time, I think we do believe that there should be a streamlining of legal mobility and migration. In other words, H-1B visas, green cards, all of the issues that many of our young students and citizens face in America should be resolved in our mutual interest. It is in America's interest and our interest to resolve this, so we are looking at that factor. There is the issue of trade, of course, and I think there will be a demand that we lower tariffs on American products, but that is not a solution, because by lowering tariffs, what you're doing is you're providing market access to everyone. So whether it is A, B or C, you will have the same market access as the Americans would have. So the solution is to have a free trade agreement that would allow preferential access to the United States in the Indian market, and India preferential access to the US market. In Trump 1.0, we worked very hard on a partial free trade agreement. We had reached a fairly advanced level of discussions, and I think it should be relatively easy to take it up where we left off, because let's say many of the actors are the same, and conclude a partial free trade agreement as soon as possible. Obviously, the Prime Minister's visit to the US between the 12th and 14th of February, it's not yet officially announced, but it's there in the media. These are the issues that will be on the table. I think it is a very important first meeting that Prime Minister Modi will have with President Trump in Trump 2.0. They've already had 2 phone conversations since the election results, but meeting face to face is a different thing altogether, and I think we will be looking forward to that. Let's come down to issues closer to home. Regionally and in our own region, I don't think things have been very easy. There have been a number of issues that have come up. One thing, of course, that you might have noticed is a sort of rapprochement with China on our border issues, because after the incidents of 2020 in the Galwan, there was a sort of a freeze in relations for the last 5 years or so. But today, I think we have made some progress not only in resolving the Galwan issue, but in terms of trying to resume a normalization of relations through re-establishment of direct flights, a loosening of the visa regime, some exchanges at various levels, and I think that possible approach would continue. Obviously, it is in our interest to have, as I said, amicable relations with all concerned, within the parameters of mutual respect, mutual sovereignty, and mutual benefit of interest, which is something that we pursue with all of our neighbors. Within our own neighborhood, I think we've seen a very volatile situation in Myanmar with civil unrest, and I think clearly the Myanmar military, the Tatmadaw, is having its own issues in controlling the ethnic groups that have been fairly restive. And in our own neighborhood, we have seen impact of this. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, whatever happens in our neighborhood impacts directly on us. I think there is no discounting that factor. You cannot ignore a situation in your neighborhood, because it is whatever developments are there in our neighborhood would invariably have an impact on you. So whether it is Myanmar, whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, wherever it is, you need to certainly observe the situation, and you need to, wherever possible, act in a manner that can stabilize situations. Now, in the case of Myanmar, we have seen that there has been a fair amount of, let's say, skirmishes between the Myanmar army and various rebel groups, even in border areas close to us. And of course, in certain areas, whether it's the Rakhine, whether it's the Sagaing division, various areas we have seen a level of instability that is having an impact on our northeast also. Because if you see, Manipur has been impacted, other states are also feeling the impact of this, and a policy that enables a more stable outcome in Myanmar is something that is in our interest, and I'm sure we are working in that direction. I won't spend time with our other neighbors because you're familiar. Sri Lanka, we have a new government, I think we've already had some positive exchanges, and hopefully I think we should keep very, very good relationship with them. The Maldives also, we have seen some developments that have been more on the positive side. Let's come down to Bangladesh, which is where I think some of us have an interest. Kolkata is just next door, a few kilometers away from the border, and you feel the impact more than anybody else in our country. So that factor is something that we have to take into account. Clearly, the situation there is very different from what it was even a few months ago. After the 5th of August, things have changed dramatically. I don't need to tell you because you're all following the news. But the fact of the matter is that a stable, prosperous Bangladesh, a secure Bangladesh is very important for us for the same reason that I outlined earlier, that instability, any sort of adverse situation in Bangladesh will invariably spill over into our borders, will have an impact on us. And so it is always our endeavor to have close relations with all our neighbors, but especially one like Bangladesh, with whom we share the largest land boundary that we share with any other country. Over 4,000 kilometers of a land boundary involving 5 of our states, not only West Bengal but also our northeastern states. And so I think if there is a deterioration in the security situation, if there is relative unrest, if there is a sense of instability, it will have impact on us. And I think, I'm afraid, the situation seems to be, from what I can see from from the public domain, deteriorating in a manner that is not to our, I would say, satisfaction. And clearly, we need to work to bring about a situation that is more conducive to good relations. How that happens is a matter of detail, but the fact is that recent developments that we have seen indicate that there is a shift from a system that has been has got its inspiration from events of 1971, which meant that Bangladesh fought against an oppressive Pakistani regime based on Bengali culture and Bengali language. Today is actually being overturned. And I'd say Rizwana ji, who's here, is an ideal epitome of that. I mean, she has herself, I think, trained thousands of proficient Rabindra Sangeet singers. The cultural worked to develop Bangladesh in a way that benefits Bangladesh. And of course, there is benefit to us as well. And I would say that what is important, and we have always emphasized that, is the people-to-people connect. And that people-to-people connect is illustrated more than any place else by West Bengal and Kolkata, where we are, and many of you have been involved in that people-to-people connect. And that people-to-people connect is based on language, culture, exchanges of a kind that we always had. And that is very, very important, because when you lose the people-to-people connect, you start to become distant. Yesterday, the media asked me that what are the people of Bangladesh, why are they anti-India? I said majority of people in Bangladesh are not anti-India. They are in favor of a good relationship with India. And that is very important to know. I mean, that is very important to note. We should not get into this misperception. I mean, it is because of the fact that your, let's say, channels of communication and media are today controlled by certain interests. And those are the interests that fought against the liberation of Bangladesh, or today back, in many senses, influencing outcomes in Bangladesh. They are the interests that fought, in many senses, openly with the Pakistani army and regime. They are the interests today that are fostering a greater connect with the ISI and bringing in elements that should not be there in terms of a nefarious, let's say, agenda. What we want is a positive agenda, not a negative agenda. What we want is more trade. What we want is more investments. We want more people-to-people ties. We want more culture. We don't want an exchange of terrorism or mutual suspicion or hatred. And that is the danger, is that there is today an attempt to bring in a sentiment which is not only anti-India and Bangladesh, but also in reaction a certain sentiment against Bangladesh in India. And I think this is something that we have to work against.
2019-এ পথ চলা শুরু বাংলা ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়াইডের। বিশ্বের বিভিন্ন জায়গায় ছড়িয়ে থাকা বাঙালিদের একত্রিত করতে ভিডিও কনফারেন্সিং এর মাধ্যমে শুরু হয় এই আন্তর্জাতিক সম্মেলন। সৌম্যব্রত দাস বলেন, সব ভাষার যোগাযোগের মাধ্যম থাকলেও বাংলা ভাষার ছিল না, তাই সকল বাঙালিকে এক করতেই এই প্রয়াস।
বহু ভাষাভাষীর দেশ, এখানে তেলেগু, মালায়ালি, গুজরাটি, এই যে এদের একটা নিজস্ব প্ল্যাটফর্ম রয়েছে। এটা কোনো যে পৃথিবীর বিভিন্ন প্রান্তে ছড়িয়ে থাকা মালায়ালিরা, তারা কিন্তু পরস্পরকে চেনে, পরস্পরকে জানে। মালায়ালি ফিল্ম একই দিনে বিভিন্ন জায়গায় লঞ্চ হয়, মালয়ালি বই লঞ্চ হয়। তো ভারতবর্ষের ক্ষেত্রে যেটা হচ্ছে যে এটা বিভিন্ন ভাষাভাষী, ফলে আমরা বাংলার ক্ষেত্রে আমাদের এরকম কোনো নিজস্ব প্ল্যাটফর্ম ছিল না, যাতে আমরা বিভিন্ন প্রান্তে ছড়িয়ে থাকা যারা বাঙালি রয়েছে তাদের সঙ্গে আমরা একটা যোগসূত্র তৈরি করতে পারি। তো হিস্টোরিক্যালি আরেকটা সমস্যা যে আমাদের পার্টিশন, হ্যাঁ। তো আমরা যেটা তৈরি করার চেষ্টা করি যে বাঙালির সৃজনশীলতা, বাঙালির মেধা, বাঙালির কৃষ্টি, এটাকে নিয়ে আমরা একটা প্ল্যাটফর্ম তৈরি করার কথা ভাবি, এবং দুই বাংলাকে নিয়ে। এবং আমরা যখন 2019 সালে প্রথম লঞ্চ হয় আমাদের, যেমন বিচারপতি চিত্ততোষ মুখার্জি আমাদের বাংলা ওয়ার্ল্ড প্রেসিডেন্ট, অধ্যাপক আনিসুজ্জামান বাংলাদেশ থেকে ছিলেন, গফফর চৌধুরী উনি ছিলেন বাংলাদেশ থেকে, পবিত্র সরকার উনি রয়েছেন, এরকম লোকজন। এটা ন্যারো পলিটিক্স এবং রিলিজিয়ানের বাইরে বাঙালির আর যা আছে সমস্ত কিছু মিলিয়েই এই প্ল্যাটফর্মটা।
বাংলাদেশের গফফর চৌধুরী, আনসারউদ্দিন জামান সহ বহু বিশিষ্ট ব্যক্তিবর্গরা যুক্ত বাংলা ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়াইডের সাথে। ক্যামেরায় শিবাজি পালের সাথে রানী চক্রবর্তীর রিপোর্ট, তারা নিউজ, সল্টলেক।